Jesus were around today, what do you think he'd be? What do you think he'd do? Perhaps he'd be a monarch. He wore a crown after all. Maybe he'd be sitting on a throne of gold, surrounded by old, ornate material wealth, cold and distant from those he'd ruled over. Living in a castle so cavernous it echoes with the sound of his own avarice, wearing clothes so magnificent they remind everyone else of their imposed impoverishment. But then again, maybe he would have had a career in politics. With somewhat of his wisdom, he would have risen to the heights of president, no question. Refusing to take responsibility, lacking in any humility and being unable to show any fragility. Looking after themselves and those within their borders and brutally sentencing those who did not comply with his orders. But could he have been a corporate leader? A shrewd and fabulously wealthy businessman that could spot a deal, buy low, sell high. Perhaps one of those socially responsible types that the press love to glorify. You know the ones, those that amass their wealth before giving it away, who forgive your fortnightly debt before flying home on their private jet. They dabble in philanthropy so they're not accused of apathy, but their actions to their lowliest of workers is nothing short of a tragedy. Jesus was a king. He wore a crown of thorns. He wore robes not of royal crimson red, but those torn and soaked in his own blood. Yes, he was a king, but willingly suffered persecution. He was a glorious leader, but a leader of a spiritual revolution. He was political for sure, but by throwing out the traders from the floor of the temple, he was defenestrating them from the holy place, the pious and the judgmental. He was unfathomably rich, not in money or material wealth and always wanting more, more, more. He was rich with compassion for the weak, the sick, the outcasts and the poor. So if Jesus was around today, what do you think he'd be? What do you think he'd do? I think he'd be a teacher. Someone who'd impart knowledge at school or at college and inspire the younger generation and give them more of a wholesome spiritual education, teaching anyone who'd want to hear about how they can save themselves by simply drawing near. No, in fact, you're right, he'd be a delivery man, making sure the vulnerable had enough food and essential items wherever he can, or at least working in the supermarkets, making sure that what we need to survive is not being hoarded and targeted by the selfish and the greedy. Yeah, he'd be looking out for the needy, probably on a 0-hour contract and minimum wage in a 1-bedroom council flat. But for sure, he'd be a healthcare worker. He'd be a doctor, a nurse, a paramedic, a healer, a carer, a pharmacist, a porter, a cleaner. He'd be there on the front line, risking his life for everyone. He'd be there because we know that's what he's already done. He already gave his life to save us from sin, to save us from ourselves and everything we've done. He'd be there sacrificing himself for our salvation. So if Jesus were around today, what do you think he'd be? What do you think he'd do? The good news is Jesus is already around today. You can see him in the face of all those around serving, the lowest of earners but the keyest of key workers. His love permeates and shapes our world through the people that know him best, not by the people that think they know best. Jesus lives today in the hearts of all those that declare him Lord, and it's that we should all be working towards.